Friends, we'll start now. I request everybody to mute yourselves, please. I request you to mute yourself, please. Friends, I request everyone to mute yourself.
Smita, why don't you do it as a host? Just mute all and unmute yourself.
Yes.
You're losing the weight.
Jitin, you are the co-host. Manage the meeting.
Okay.
I now call the meeting to order. Everybody, please raise your right hand for the national anthem, please.
भारत भाग्य विधाता पंजाब सिंध गुजरात मराठा द्राविड़ उत्कल बंगा विंध्य हिमाचल यमुना गंगा उच्छल जलधि तरंग तव शुभ नाम जोगे तब शुभ आशीष मांगे गाहे तव जय गाथा जन गण मंगल नायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता जय हे जय हे जय हे जय 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 जय
A very good evening and a warm welcome to all the members of Rotary Club of Bombay Bayview, my co-presidents of the 36 clubs who are co-hosting this meeting with us today, and my fellow Rotarian friends. We also welcome our special guests for today, Mr. and Mrs. Habil Khorakiwala. A warm welcome to our speaker, Mrs. Zavia Khorakiwala. Today, she is going to speak to us about what lies ahead of this pandemic, the vaccination process, and the way forward. I would like to share a few updates on our ongoing projects. The crowdfunding campaign, which we are running to support the nurses with wellness kits, has raised 34 lakh rupees till now, and we yet have 6 more days to go. By virtue of this, we will be able to support about 3,500 nurses, but friends, our goal is to reach out to 5,000 plus nurses all over Bombay. So let's keep the momentum on. I appeal to everyone here on the meeting to support our cause. We have already started the distribution process of these kits, and we started this on the 12th of May, which was the International Nurses Day. So till now, we have distributed wellness kits to various health posts of the BMCD ward, the Wokhar Hospital, the St. Elizabeth Hospital, and the SRCC Hospital. In the coming week, we will be distributing kits at Kama Hospital, St. George Hospital, GT Hospital, and the various few more health posts in the D ward. So moving on to our rural project, our check dam, the check dam which we are making in the Garatpada is almost ready. It is nearing completion and should be ready in by next week. It should be ready. We will be distributing around 12 oxygen concentrators in the coming week. 10 would be distributed at the various BMC hospitals, and 2 would be distributed at Talasuri. Friends, another important update. We have the Unicorn Discon, which is coming up on the 30th of May. It is an online event, and it is between 9 to 6. It has an unprecedented array of speakers, thinkers, Bollywood stars, political leaders, industrialists, and many, many industrialists. So friends, please definitely sign up for this. The charge of attending this is only 500 rupees. So please register for this at the earliest. So that's all from my side. So now, can I invite our medical director, Samina Korakiwala, to introduce Mrs. Zavia Korakiwala, our speaker for today evening.
Thank you, President Smita. Good evening, co-presidents, friends, Rotarians, and everybody on this platform today. It's an honor for me to introduce to you this evening Zahabia Korakiwala. Zahabia Korakiwala is the Managing Director of Wockhardt Hospitals, a chain of new age multi-super speciality hospitals. Under her stewardship, Wockhardt Hospitals has emerged as the country's foremost patient-centric and innovative healthcare destination globally. Zahabia has augmented Wockhardt Hospital's robust portfolio in Tier 2 cities by setting up 2 new hospitals in Mumbai. The ultra-modern quaternary care South Mumbai Hospital that she built from scratch received the accreditation from the coveted JCI, which is the Joint Commission International, within first 3 years of its operation, an unparalleled feat in Indian healthcare industry. Zahabia is also leading Wockhardt Hospitals through a patient-centric, multidimensional digital transformation process to continue to provide convenient, personalized, efficient, and effective care for the patients. Championed by robust research and development, Zahabia has envisaged and instituted an advanced multidisciplinary regenerative medicine business and the newest venture of Wockhardt Group. Zahabia has also set up the Wockhardt Global School, a state-of-art K-12 school with international baccalaureate continuum and the CBSE program in Aurangabad. She has been recognized as India's 40 under 40 emerging business leader and one of the corporate India's fastest rising women leaders by Economic Times. She was also conferred with Young Businesswoman Leader Award by Lions Club International and the Women Leadership in Healthcare Award by ABP News. Zahabia strongly believes in the power of calm. That is to maintain grace under pressure, overcome challenges, learn from setbacks, and focus on goals. She considers knowledge, courage, and imagination as the 3 most important drivers for success. Schooled at the prestigious Eglon College in Switzerland, Zahabia went on to study psychology at New York University and later received an MBA degree from the Indian School of Business. Zahabia is a mother of 2 young daughters, a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old. Welcome, Zahabia, to us all, and we take this on forward from you. You need to unmute yourself. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Samina, for the elaborate introduction. Thank you to President Smita and the Rotary Club of Bayview for the invitation, and to all the other presidents, members that have joined here this evening. I really wanted to, use this platform as an opportunity. We are hearing a lot about COVID. There is an overload of information that we get from news media, from international media, and across the board. And I wanted to use this time to really focus on some of the things that are really important for people to understand and know about the management of COVID, the prevention of COVID, how we can do that in simple ways, and the protection related to the vaccine, as well as a little bit about the outlook of what we see coming. I think the platform is pretty relevant because Wockhardt Hospital, we're a chain of primarily in Maharashtra, with Bombay, Nasik, Nagpur, Rajkot, as the centers where we're located. In Bombay, we have 2 hospitals, one in South Bombay and one in Mira Road. So, for the clubs that are here present, I know there is a spectrum of clubs from South Bombay right up to, the northern part of the city. We have been managing COVID for, since last March, and have been playing a very active role in the management of COVID patients within our hospital as well as in the larger community. So with that, I'd just like to quickly get into the presentation. Vikram, if we could have the deck, please. Also, I would be happy to take questions at the end once we are finished. So, you could make a note of those as we go along. So really, the focus of my discussion today is really about us living through the pandemic. I think we have lived through it for over a year, and it looks like we will be continuing to live through it for some significant time more. And therefore, we must be prepared to really understand what are the methods to prevent as well as protect ourselves to the best of our abilities. I'm sure a lot of people here have been affected. Everybody knows somebody who's been affected, and it is important to know the best ways that we can go through this pandemic in a calm and unpanicked manner. So I just want to start quickly with a few numbers. The next slide, please, to just give a little context and lay a little context and perspective. So these are the India numbers of COVID thus far. The green line indicates the daily cases that the country has seen, which is at around 400,000, about 4 lakh patients a day is what we're at. The total number of cases is in blue, and we have crossed about 20 million as a country. And the deaths that we have recorded is about 250,000 patients so far. The curve kind of is going a little bit up and down, slightly declining now that we are seeing, in the recent couple of days or so. If we look at globally the numbers, so the US has recorded about 35 or close to 35 million COVID cases and a death toll of 600,000. The UK has recorded about 4.5 million with a death toll of about 120,000. And at a world, at a global level, we have seen about 170 million cases of COVID so far, about 160, and a death toll of about 3 million. The curve, obviously, the green lines indicate the ups and the downs. Obviously, it is very clear that the second peak has been a far sharper spike, almost double of what we had seen the first time around. How is this going to play out in the future? The honest truth is nobody really knows, right? We are seeing the virus mutating. We also very clearly know that the virus is always going to be 2 steps ahead of us, and our theories and hypotheses around this. But, the principal scientific advisor for the government of India to the PMO's office, Dr. Vijay Raghavan, has said that the 3rd wave is inevitable in India, and it is obviously not clear when this will occur and how long it will last. But I think the combination of the fact that we have still vaccinated a very small percentage of our population, and the virus will survive, will mutate to survive, we will see a 3rd wave at some point in time, and in the near or slightly near future. Next slide, please. Yeah. So just want to talk a little bit about prevention, right? They're very simple preventive things to do to prevent COVID, and they really do work. Masking is a very important one. I forgot to get my mask. So if you just, okay, I'll just, hold on. So I wanted to just show you very quickly the mask etiquette, right, which is so important. So when you put on a mask, you always hold the mask from the sides where, you know, it goes around your ears. You put it on and you put it behind your ear. Now, what is very important is after you wear your mask, there should be really no contact with your hand on the mask. The constant adjusting of the mask on the nose bridge, moving it up and down with your hand is an ananthem as far as the mask etiquette is concerned, because all the potential COVID virus, if you are interacting with someone with COVID or otherwise, is sitting on the front of your mask. So you never touch your mask, the front of your mask, with your hands. If you do, you wash your hands. And when you remove your mask, you don't touch your mask from the front and remove it, but you undo it from the back of your ears. You always hold the strings of the mask, undo it, and place the side which is outside, facing the outside on the table, for example, if you need to. And the inside is the one that should always stay sterile or clean, or as clean as possible. You know, this is a very important thing, because just wearing a mask is not adequate. You need to also follow the etiquette of wearing a mask correctly. You know, in terms of the different kinds of masks, there's a lot of, I mean, the cloth mask, surgical mask. For us, for people like us, really, the cloth mask and the surgical mask are adequate. They both provide similar 50% protection of any aerosols that you could inhale. The N95, of course, is only for healthcare professionals, practitioners, people who are in hospital settings treating COVID patients. Double masking is good. That is a new, CDC has come out with that as a new guideline. It does prevent aerosols from coming in by a further about, you know, it's at about 85% if you double mask. So, you know, double, single, all of that is important, but the mask etiquette is very important in terms of not touching your mask when you're wearing it. Hand wash, right? It's such a simple thing that is important to remember. When you move from place to place, you go into your car, you go to a place, wash your hands. You come back home, wash your hands. You know, sanitizing is good, but it doesn't need to be overdone. Quite honestly, I think washing hands with soap, water, is the best thing that you can do in terms of hand hygiene, which is the foremost thing of spreading COVID. In terms of surface disinfection, a lot of people, and I think at least in the beginning of the pandemic, it was very common that, you know, people were scrubbing their homes or the doorknobs or their keys. You know, some of the parcels takeaway parcels coming home, wiping them down with sanitizer. It is not required. The spread of COVID through surfaces and fomites is very, very unlikely and very, very minimal. So the risk of that is very low. You know, we don't need to be too paranoid about constantly decontaminating surfaces repeatedly and on a continuous basis. Hand hygiene, normal cleanliness are really the more important things to do. The next slide, please. Yeah, so steam inhalation is a good is good. You know, a lot of people have been you know, kind of inculcated this practice in their daily routines of inhaling once a day, twice a day. It's a very good practice, you know, to just keep to do this on a daily basis if you can put it into your routine, because it does any early virus that is possibly in the nasal area could be, you know, early kind of taken care of by steam inhalations. It's a very good practice. We do it with our own healthcare workers. So our own nurses, doctors, after every shift, they have to inhale, of course, after their showers and all of that, they have to mandatorily steam inhale. So it's a very good practice in COVID times. The next slide, please. Yeah. And ventilated places, you know, being in ventilated places is ideal if you can, and socialize, meet people, because ventilation cuts out, the transmission and the likelihood of catching COVID very, very significantly. In fact, when sometimes we're traveling in a car, even when a lot of us may have had to take COVID patients to the hospital in our cars or otherwise, and it's a good, and even if you just put your window down by a little inch, it is enough ventilation to cut down the likelihood of transmission. So it's, we all travel by cars here and there, and it's a good practice to keep your window a little bit open. It doesn't really make it too hot, but at the same time, it ventilates the car adequately. And of course, prevention, right? I mean, in the beginning of COVID, there was a fair amount of taboo and, a little bit of stigma around having COVID, and so symptoms were often ignored. I think that has gone. And so any symptom, right? Cough, cold, headache, body ache, diarrhea, loss of taste is a big one. Loss of taste and loss of smell is a very, very classical, unique COVID symptom. And none of these should be ignored. Important to get tested ASAP so that treatment can start, and more importantly, you can isolate. We are seeing that this phase of the virus is far more infectious. We're also seeing that it's probably a little more, aggressive as well. So isolation is something you can do immediately on signs of symptoms, even if your reports come after a day or two, but isolate. I wanted to talk a little bit about the tests. We're all kind of pretty aware of the tests, and everybody knows of, the names and, certain tests that should be asked for during COVID. And I wanted to talk a little bit about really the significance of them, what they mean, and what are the important things to know about them. The RT-PCR is the gold standard for testing COVID. The likelihood of having COVID and still getting a negative is 30%, so it has a 70% sensitivity. On your RT-PCR test, you will see something called a CT value. That CT value indicates the viral load in the individual. So if you have a higher viral load, the reading will be less than 20. If you have a moderate viral load, the reading will be between 20 to 28, and a very low or almost negligible viral load is somewhere above 30. Having said that, this reading is not to be assumed or applied on an individual basis. It's not very accurate on an individual basis. It is used to analyze data in general populations, etc. So it is indicative when you look at it, but it is not something to get overly anxious or panicky about when you see the CT readings on a RT-PCR report. The second test is the rapid antigen test. This is the RAT test, which comes when you do a RAT, you will get a result in 10 minutes time. It's the instant test. However, the sensitivity of this test is only 50%. So you will miss a positive COVID if you do only a rapid. Therefore, if you do a rapid is only used to detect if it catches, if it's positive, it is a confirmed positive. However, if it is negative, you have to do an RT-PCR to confirm the absence of COVID. A RAT cannot be relied on with certainty in a negative result. So it's very important. A lot of people do rapid tests, but don't follow it up with an RT-PCR if the rapid is negative. That is not correct, because you may be in a false sense of impression that it is negative, but it is actually not. Very important to follow up a RAT with an RT-PCR if it is negative. And then we have the HRCT, which is the CT scan of the chest, which is often ordered by doctors. There are two values really to look at and to know about in a chest CT. The first is you will see a score on the report, which ranges from 1 to 25. That score indicates the severity of COVID in the lungs. So you have a lower score, there is less infiltration of COVID in the lungs, and you have a higher score, it's indicative of more COVID and a more severe COVID in the lungs. The CORAD score, there's another score that you will find. Most good institutes will have a second score as well on a CT report, and that is called the CORAD. And that is a score from 1 to 6. That 1 is the lowest and 6 is the highest, but it has no bearing on the severity of COVID. It has nothing to do with the severity of the disease, but rather on the likelihood of the lung presenting with COVID. So if you have a score of, say, 1 shows that it's a normal infection, it is not COVID. 2 shows that it is typical for infections, but again, not COVID. 3 shows that it could be COVID, it may not be COVID. And 4, 5, and 6 is confirmatory. So sometimes, even if you get a negative on the rapid or negative on the RT-PCR, even if the RT-PCR is negative because the sensitivity is only 70%, but the CORAD score is a 6, then it is confirmatory of COVID. So your RT-PCR may be negative, but your CORAD is 6, and that is taken as a confirmation of positive COVID. So this is what we follow even in hospitals, because the RT-PCR still misses a good chunk of patients who are positive, but they don't show up on the RT-PCR. But a CORAD is used as an additional scan, especially if the patient is presenting with symptoms, to determine COVID or to rule it out. And then once you have COVID, once it is confirmed that the patient has COVID, these are the important tests that are carried out and to look out for. If there are symptoms, all of this is done when a patient is, at least the first 2, which are 2 blood tests, CRP and D-dimer, are really done when a patient is symptomatic. If the patient is asymptomatic or maybe symptoms for a day, it's really not required to be carrying out all the tests. But if the patient is symptomatic, CRP is an inflammatory marker. Higher CRP levels indicate greater inflammation and more severity, and a lower one obviously indicates a milder disease. A normal range of CRP is under 10, so you will commonly find people having CRPs of 50 and very acute, they will be at 150, 200. So this is what we do see in patients with COVID. And CRP is an important marker because it has a prognostic value. Prognostic means that it has a predictive value of how the patient is likely to do in the future. So what is the outcome and how is the disease likely to progress? So it's a very important marker that clinicians use in treating and determining how to treat a patient who has COVID. The second test is a D-dimer, which is also commonly done because of the presentation of clot formation in patients who have COVID. It assesses clot formation, and obviously higher D-dimer levels indicate more severity as compared to lower ones, and clinicians will prescribe anticoagulant medication to deal with this. The very common one, of course, is SpO2 saturation levels, oxygen saturation levels in the blood. Anything above 95 is fine. There is no reason to get panicky if, if someone is at a 96 or a 97, it is absolutely fine. From 90 to 94, I would say anything under 93, 92 is where you should start kind of thinking about having supplemental oxygen in case your SpO2 levels fall. The supplemental oxygen could be at home, depending on what your physician feels, or it could be admission into a hospital. It's always better when SpO2 levels start coming down below a 93 level to seriously consider hospitalization, because at this point, the disease can very quickly change within a few hours, 12 hours from what, seemed to be manageable at home to, how it could go. So anything below a 93-ish kind of a level, 92, you should be thinking about getting, better monitored clinical care. Next slide, please. Yeah, so I put this slide because, we did see now, obviously, the, hospitals are able to take COVID patients, but in a time when the hospitals are overwhelmed, it is not easy to get a bed in a hospital. And we saw plenty of that, a week or so ago in Bombay as well. These are a few things that can be done at home. If you do not have access to oxygen, and even if you do have access to oxygen, but if you don't have, and you to maintain your saturation levels, above 93, 95, these are called proning positions. And you can change these positions. It's basically about getting as much oxygen into the lungs, into the entire lung space, not just one area, but across, the entire lungs. And all the positions are better than sleeping on your back. So when saturation levels are falling, sleeping on your back is not what you should be doing, but on your side, sitting up, on your stomach, flat on your stomach with pillows under your legs. These are the positions that will help you to maintain a higher saturation level until you can get oxygen or until you can get a hospital bed. Even in a hospital, even in our hospital, in the ICU, patients are proned. They are continuously moved into these various positions every 30 minutes to 2 hours to help them to maintain their saturation levels, so that we can delay ventilation support for as long as possible. The objective of any ICU is to delay a ventilated patient, and even when ventilated, actually, we do prone our patients to improve their outcomes and help their recovery. So proning is a clinical technique used in hospitals. When hospitals are not available, this can be used at home as well. I wanted to talk a little bit about the medications for COVID, just because, we're all acutely aware of them and often feel that these are life-saving, and there is a lot of panic and stress about if we're not able to get them. The first-line treatment, of course, is antivirals. The reason for antivirals is that during the viremia stage, which is, day 1 to 7, is when there is viral replication taking place in the body. And these antivirals reduce the viral replication and therefore the viral load in the body. The common ones that are used is Fabiflu, ivermectin, remdesivir is an injectable, so can only be given in a hospital setting. It's very important to know that these antivirals, when given within 7 or 10 days from the onset of symptoms, can help in reducing the viral load. But once they are given after this period, it has practically a placebo effect. It has no effect on the outcome of the patient. So the scramble for remdesivir, actually, which was patients that are critical needing remdesivir, they have way past the stage of when a remdesivir can have any benefit. And even when given on time, all the latest clinical studies done, research publications done on remdesivir have shown that it has no benefit on mortality outcomes. The best case scenario of remdesivir is that it shortens or it hastens recovery by 2 days. So whether you get remdesivir, you don't get remdesivir, the patient will not live or die because of it. Yes, they may get well faster by a couple of days, but that is the best that remdesivir can do. So sometimes I think there is a deep sense of guilt that I know a lot of relatives feel that they were not able to get remdesivir for their family who passed away, or their friend, but really this has no benefit on mortality outcomes. The second is tocilizumab and all the mAbs actually, which are used in more severe, moderate to severe cases. These are immunosuppressants largely used to suppress the cytokine storm that comes in. Again, these tocilizumab has no proven effect or benefit on mortality outcomes. In fact, at our hospital, we have, at our South Bombay hospital, we have stopped using Toci for almost 6 to 8 months because because of the immunosuppression, it does result in higher secondary infections, and patients can succumb to these secondary infections rather than COVID itself. And you have steroids, which are anti-inflammatory and are used as a pretty first-line treatment if the patient is symptomatic and requires steroids. Again, steroids to be used on indication of symptoms, not to be started as a standard treatment for COVID, anyone who has COVID, because there are downsides to every medication, including steroids, which we are seeing a little bit of now, and I'll talk about. And there is plasma therapy again, some benefit in mild to moderate cases, almost no benefit at all in severe cases, patients in the ICU being given plasma, unlikely to work. And there is a new, antibody cocktail which has come out by Roche, again for mild to moderate cases, and only shown to reduce the duration of symptoms, no real effects on mortality. So I just wanted to kind of talk a little bit about this to allay the angst and of patients getting these or not getting these, and the severe panic that we all go through. Whilst yes, we want to give up our loved ones the best, but if they don't get it, this is not why they're making it or not making it. The next slide, please. I wanted to talk a little bit about mucormycosis, which is what we're seeing. You would be reading about it and hearing about it a little bit on the news and in the papers. This is really what we're seeing as very serious condition resulting from COVID treatment, and I would say unindicated COVID treatment. It is a fungus, it's a fungal infection that affects the sinus and the lungs, and it enters through the nose area, really, nose and 50% of patients with mucormycosis die. It's a very serious fungal infection. It moves very rapidly and moves up and reaches the brain, and then you have, we've had patients that we've had to remove the eyes, the eyeball, because of the infection. People have the entire jaws removed. So this is a very serious condition that you should really watch out for, don't delay on. These are some of the very early symptoms of mucor, which is any kind of blockage, nasal blockage, numbness, toothache, skin lesions that you may see, chest pain, breathlessness. This is to be attended to ASAP, and this requires really a multidisciplinary team to attend to it. There will be, of course, your internal medicine or your infectious disease, care consultant will be your primary treating doctor. A neurologist will also get involved because it does, affect the brain. An ENT surgeon would get involved. So it is a multidisciplinary approach required to treat mucormycosis, and therefore the selection of where you get this treated is also very important. The treatments really for mucor is intravenous antifungal therapies, treatments, surgical, very aggressive surgical debridements to be done, and these are sometimes can be very long, drawn out treatments for the patient. And the reason why we're seeing mucor is actually, so any infection, like a fungal infection, really is able to attack the body when your immunity is low. And the reason why we're seeing this is because of the overuse of steroids, which suppresses your immunity, and the use of immunosuppressants like tocilizumab for the treatment of COVID. So when steroids are used unjudiciously, when not required, in very high doses, and they're not stopped, in the right time. So there is a regime to be followed for using steroids. They cannot be used indefinitely or extended. And when these things happen, the natural immunity of your body is at its lowest, and therefore we're seeing these kind of infections coming in. So again, important to treat COVID by what is needed to treat it, not to over-treat it. At the same time, watch out for anything that you see which have these symptoms for mucor in post-COVID patients. And uncontrolled diabetes. Diabetes, like for all conditions really, uncontrolled diabetes is a big risk factor to take mucor out of hand and make it difficult to treat. Post-COVID recovery, patients who've had COVID, often will feel quite tired and exhausted for extended periods of time. It has a prolonged effect. Important to just rest, relax your body, bring it back, eat, healthy foods, hydrate, and also, important to do brain exercises. When I say brain exercises, playing Sudoku or cognitive games or puzzles or, things that kind of juggle the memory as well as the cognitive abilities are good, because COVID is known to affect the neurological function, and therefore engaging in these things post-COVID helps you to not degenerate that part, which is what COVID does. Next slide, please. And of course, the best way to protect all of us from getting COVID is, of course, vaccinate, vaccinate, vaccinate. Unfortunately, we are in a little bit of a situation now where we don't have vaccines available, even though we all want to vaccinate. But whenever it is available, as soon as it is available, we should vaccinate. There shouldn't be any hesitation around vaccination and vaccinating yourself. I just wanted to talk a little bit about, since there are so many vaccines now potentially that are coming in and could come in, I just want to talk a little bit about the vaccines. I'm not going to get into too much of the technology of the vaccines, except for the fact that, so today we have Covishield and Covaxin. We also know that Sputnik is going to be, it's in the market today, but practically speaking, it'll be a few weeks and we should have it in the market. And some of the other imported vaccines, if they do come, like Pfizer, Moderna, or J&J, those may also be available. Essentially, all of these, if you look at the technologies and the from old to new, the inactivated virus, the Covaxin is the oldest technology that has been used for vaccine development, followed by the viral vector vaccine, which is Covishield and Sputnik, and J&J, followed by DNA plasmid, and then the mRNA. So mRNA is the latest technology for vaccine, for the COVID vaccines. Obviously, this is going to be a logistically challenging thing because of the temperatures at which they have to be stored, and therefore may or may not be available in India. What is very important to know is that whilst we can maybe go to the next slide. Oh, no, okay, so I'll just talk about it then. So what is very important to know is that whilst these efficacies vary and differ from, I want to go back to that same vaccine slide, please. Yeah, just take. Okay, what's very important to know is whilst these efficacies vary, 70 to 90 and 60, really, the efficacy is really about the likelihood of someone to get COVID, right? So 76 means that 76% of the population that has 2 doses of Covishield will not get COVID if exposed to it. However, all 100% of the patients that do get COVID, do get Covishield and exposed to COVID, none of them, even the 30% that do get, 25% that do get COVID, will all be protected from severe COVID. So regardless of the efficacy, whether it is 90% or 70%, all of these vaccines will prevent severe disease by and large. And therefore, delaying a shot by a week or two, doesn't really serve in getting a better efficacy, because your effectiveness of the vaccine is just as much, in all the cases. We can go to, yeah. So this is about the Indian vaccination. Hello. Okay. So this is about where we are with vaccinations in India. We have really got both doses vaccinated. Population, only 2%, 2.5% of our population has been vaccinated with 2 doses, and about 7% have received a single dose. And in order for the population as a whole to be protected and for us to have herd immunity, we need 70% of our population to be vaccinated, which is about 2 billion doses of vaccines to be produced and inoculated in people. This is really what I was talking about earlier, where the efficacy is less important. More important to know that the effectiveness of all in real world data, what we know is consistent across all vaccines. Yeah, so this I wanted to kind of show you a little bit about. This is the total number of people that have been vaccinated across the countries from high to low. So the US has vaccinated about 150 million people who've received the first dose. That is the light gray bar. And the people that have received both doses is about close to 120 million. India is the second highest in terms of the number of people that have got the first dose, about 140 million, 30 odd million, and the 2 doses is only about 30 odd million, 35 odd million, followed by the rest of the country. So whilst we've, the numbers look, in absolute numbers, it does look like we've vaccinated and have, got a fair number of people vaccinated. But when you really look at it as a percentage of our population, which is the next slide, the graph really reverses, right? So this is really about countries which have vaccinated the percentage of population that has been vaccinated of their total population. So Israel, for example, is right at the top, obviously a smaller country, but the UK, the US is at about 30-35% of their population is vaccinated. United Kingdom, again, at about 25% have received both doses. And when you look at India, we are really low down there at about 2%. So as a percentage of our population, we have a long way to go before we can actually be protected from the 3rd wave or the 4th wave that is likely to come. So the absolute numbers show a picture, but when you look at it in terms of the protection of the population, it's quite a different perspective. And then I wanted to just some questions common questions that people have and doubts that people have about vaccinations. These are very safe in the sense that there has been rigorous clinical trials done. They have been checked for both safety and effectiveness, and have all the vaccines currently available in the market have passed on both these tests. sorry, I do have a 4-year-old at home. So, do they have side effects? Yes, I mean, all vaccines have side effects. Some people do experience side effects like fever, body ache, etc. And some people don't. It has no real correlation to whether the vaccine is effective if you get the side effects, and that it may not be effective if you don't. And if you persist, there have been many people that I know that have had symptoms like COVID beyond 48 hours of taking the vaccine. These symptoms vaccine-related symptoms will last about 48 hours. Anything beyond 48 hours is not vaccine-related. So if that happens, do get tested for COVID, do an RT-PCR. It is very possible that at the time that you took the vaccine, you were probably harboring a COVID infection already, probably asymptomatic, and the vaccine kind of pushed it over the edge. So any COVID-like symptoms that persist beyond 48 hours should get tested and not be assumed to be vaccine-related symptoms. Do these offer protection against the new variants? I mean, by and large, yes. The scientific community does believe that these do offer protection against severe COVID. What should be the gap? Every vaccine has a different regime, actually. For Covaxin, Covishield, about 4 to 6 weeks. The recent advisory from the government has said Covishield should be 12 to 16 weeks for better efficacy. I mean, I think it's, regardless of the efficacy changing, the effectiveness, whenever you take the vaccine, the second dose is going to protect you adequately from severe COVID. Sputnik, for example, has a 21-day gap, but it's a very rigid 21-day gap. You cannot delay Sputnik beyond 21 days for the second dose because there are two different vaccines that you're getting. You're not getting the same, it's not the same, they're two different vectors. So Sputnik has to be taken on 21 days. You cannot delay that beyond that. Are vaccines safe to take during menstruation? Yes, they are. Safe to get vaccinated during pregnancy. The government of India has said no, because populations tested have not been tested on pregnant women. Patients undergoing active cancer treatment, can they get vaccinated? This needs to be discussed, I would say, with your oncologist. There is no black and white yes or no on this, because these are immunocompromised patients. And if you're living with a virus like HIV, can you still take the vaccine? Yes, you can. Once I am vaccinated, do I need to follow good COVID prevention behavior? Yes, you do. Because you can still carry a virus, you can still infect somebody else, and being vaccinated is not the ticket to going back to living the way that we were before we knew of COVID. So yes, you do still have to follow all the preventive COVID measures and good COVID behaviors that should be followed. So Wockhardt has vaccinated. We've got a roll up your sleeve campaign for getting people to get vaccinated. Vaccinated about 35,000 people so far. And I would really strongly tell people to get the shot as soon as they can. I just wanted to kind of talk a little bit about certain myths, facts, that questions I've been asked about COVID. Some of them might seem amusing to people here, but I was also a bit amused. So anyways, I'm just sharing some of these. We can go to that. Yeah. So is a CT scan a must if you have confirmed COVID? No, absolutely not. You don't need to do a CT scan unless it is prescribed by your doctor. If you are asymptomatic, mildly symptomatic, there is no need to go for a CT. There is no need to panic and get your lungs checked out if your symptoms are either not there or they're very mild. So go by the doctor's advice. It's not a standard test to be done after you are found to be positive. Yeah, this is the other one. So if I have recovered from COVID, do I need a negative RT-PCR test? The answer is no. If someone in your house has had COVID and after they have finished their 14 days of the first day of symptoms to 14 days is the period at which after 14 days is when they are not infectious anymore. So a patient who has recovered from COVID completely, and if you do an RT-PCR test on them, it is very possible that they can continue to test positive for COVID for well beyond their recovery period. So they can test positive for 1 month, 2 months, even up to 10 weeks, they can keep testing positive, but they are not infectious. So can they move around freely post 14 days after the onset of the first symptom? Yes, they can. So even COVID patients in the hospital, in the ICU, if they have crossed their 14 days, we take a buffer of another 5 days. If they are still being treated for all the post-COVID symptoms, they can actually be moved into a non-COVID area if the clinician feels so. These patients are not infective. There is no reason to repeat a COVID test post-recovery. And it is quite possible they may continue to test positive. So they are non-infectious, and you don't have to repeat a test. Lactating mothers, should they stop breastfeeding if they are positive? No, they can continue to breastfeed. The benefits of breastfeeding outweigh there is practically no chance of breast milk transporting or transferring the virus to the child. Can any food items prevent COVID-19? No, they can't. Are there ways to up your immunity for COVID-19? Practically speaking, we all kind of have a very inbuilt immunity. We can't really do things to change that overnight or a couple of months. We did a study actually in our hospital of zinc, because a lot of people have been started taking zinc and vitamin C as an immunity boosting tablets to boost their immunity and therefore prevent COVID. We did a study using zinc, so patients who were on zinc and were not on zinc, but we saw absolutely no difference in patients who were on zinc, not Thank you. I'm happy to take any questions that anyone may have.
Zavia, that was a fantastic, very, very informative session on on mask etiquettes, on various tests, treatments, post-COVID recovery, and vaccines. Fantastic. Thank you very much, Zavia. So we have a few questions on the chat. So why is the level of antibody response different after vaccines in different people?
Vikram, do you want to just shut the presentation? Yeah. Sorry. So why is the antibody response different in different people?
Yeah.
Was that, yeah. I mean, I think it's just based on different people's immunities and their responses to the vaccine, in the same way that vaccine efficacy is from 70% of 60% to 90%. It's the same reason. There isn't any it's more about individual differences which result in differences in the antibody response.
We have another question. With the new variant coming up, will the vaccine get changed? Will this be a regular phenomenon like the flu?
It could be, right, because we know with the influenza vaccine, every year we take the shot, and the shot is slightly different. It accounts for the variation, the mutation that has happened. So yes, when COVID does become a regular thing that we're living with, it is very possible that we would be having. We're definitely going to have to keep taking the vaccine to protect ourselves from COVID. Whether it is every 6 months or 1 year, the current data for the vaccines is about 6 months. So whether it is 6 months or 1 year, either which way, we will have to keep taking the shot, and it is quite possible that the vaccines will account for the the mutations that are occurring, and we will have a slightly different vaccine each year.
So the next question we have is that what is the level of efficacy after the first vaccine dose?
You really can't consider, it has some efficacy, but really you can't consider yourself to be, I would say, from a practical perspective, if you take your first dose, it's not time to say that I'm going to be protected from COVID. No, you're not. A lot of people are getting COVID after the first dose. And the severity of COVID is also, you are not protected from severe COVID after the first dose. So even after you take a first dose of the vaccine, you can still get severe COVID. And that is the very important thing to remember, that you're not protected from severe COVID. And only after your 2 doses is when you get protected from severe COVID.
So there's one question on the chat that if a person has got COVID in March, if he's vaccinated with the first dose in March, had COVID in April, after 14 days of home quarantine, should he yet take the second dose?
Yes, he should take the second dose after the stipulated period, which I think is about 2 to 4 weeks.
The next question we have is that can we have vaccination drives initiated in housing societies where Rotary clubs can get involved?
Yes, so we are doing that. Obviously, everything is is dependent on the availability of the supplies. But yes, Maharashtra government has given permission now for hospitals to vaccinate on site at corporates and housing societies. So we are undertaking the same, tying up a lot of corporates and societies that have approached us. We are doing so. But again, the supplies really have a rate limiter as to how fast we can do this and how quickly we can vaccinate. But yes, it is possible.
So after the second dose of vaccine, is there any test required to be taken to assess the antibody levels?
Yes, you can do an antibody test. Any of the labs can do it, and you can find that out. Yes.
So when does the effect of vaccines kick into post the second dose?
So the Covishield, every vaccine has slightly different stipulated periods. Covishield is 2 weeks. Covaxin, I believe, is 4 weeks. So you can just check up on those. But yeah, every vaccine has a slightly different period after which you get the complete efficacy of the vaccine.
So what is the count of antibodies required to be protected from COVID?
I believe it is, I don't remember it now off the cuff, but I don't know. I can look that up and tell you, but I can come back on that.
So any more questions?
If I can ask a question, can I?
Yeah.
Hi, it's more a generic question. You've debunked so many myths about COVID is probably not transmittable by surface contact. So that's a big relief because all of us stopped getting newspapers at home for a long, long time. And now we are slowly resumed back. We don't want to stop that again. So, if you can guide me about, even before COVID came, we read in the papers that our phones carry a lot of germs and bacteria, and we should not, we should keep it clean. And well, is that true, or that is also just a myth? Because right now, what we are doing is we sanitize our phones once a day with sanitizers, at the risk of losing the speaker volumes and all that stuff. So if you can throw some guidances on this.
Yeah, so I think the reason really phones was kind of put in the highlight of the thing is because we all have our phones on us 24/7, and it is the one thing that we hold with our hands all the time. And our hands really go to our face, our mouth, our nose, areas where COVID can get transmitted. Having said that, no, you don't need to sanitize your phone every day. There's a lot of negative stuff of over sanitization, like corrosion and all of that, which will happen with the alcohol. So yeah, I have never sanitized my phone. I do go into the hospital regularly, but yeah, you don't need to do that.
That's a relief, actually.
Smita, I have a question.
Yeah, guys, I would appreciate all the questions in the chat box. But yes, please go ahead, Harsh.
Right. So, hi, Zavia. A lovely, very informative session. My name is Chef Harsh, and my question is related to food. Can COVID be spread by food? I know it's a no, but a lot of people are still paranoid about eating food, raw food, and they think that they can get infected by people who are preparing food. So can you please give us some clarity on that?
Like I said earlier, very unlikely for COVID to spread through food or through somebody who has handled food and you have eaten the food that they have handled. Quite unlikely, because let's kind of remember the basics of how you catch any infection. One is that you have to have a very, very high viral load which you are taking in, and your immunity has to be low for you to get infected with it. So if you have all of these surfaces which potentially carry COVID, the virus, the load of the virus on these surfaces is very low. Therefore, it's very unlikely that even if you are exposed to a surface which has COVID on it, has the virus on it, the likelihood that your own immunity is unable to cope with that low viral load is very unlikely. So it's really a function of the viral load, how high it is and how low your immunity is. So therefore, it's very unlikely to pass. COVID is most often passed when two people are not wearing masks and they're having a conversation with each other, even if nobody is symptomatic. But if you're having a conversation with someone for 20 minutes or more, that is considered to be a high contact exposure. Any other exposure, even if I'm interacting with someone who has COVID, I'm not aware of it, or I have to interact, and we are both wearing masks, it is very unlikely for me to catch COVID. So we don't have to be overtly, this is not airborne. This is droplet borne. We still know it is droplet borne. It is not airborne. So it is not likely to you are not likely to catch COVID if you're wearing a mask, if you're maintaining a distance, if you're washing your hands, you're maintaining a good mask etiquette. You won't catch it even if you're interacting with a patient or a person who has COVID.
Thank you.
Yes. The next question we have is that, is there any test to know that a person is still a carrier after 14 days of quarantine?
So that's what I said. Anybody who gets COVID, was the question that after they get COVID, are they still a carrier?
Carrier, even after so is there a test by which you can know that a person is not a carrier after 14 days of quarantine?
Okay, so it is known, these are the guidelines internationally, that COVID, when is COVID infectious? A virus is infectious in the viremia stage, when there is replication of the virus happening. That happens in the first 7 to 10 days. So 14 days is already taken as a very, it's taken as a buffer outer limit as to when a patient who has COVID from the first day of symptom. So first day of symptom is day 1, and 14 days after the first day of symptom is when they're non-infectious. So they may continue to shed the virus, but that shedding is 0.1, 0.01. You cannot get COVID from that shedding, and they are not infectious anymore whatsoever. So post 14 days, there is no requirement of a test. And that's what I said earlier, that even if you do an RT-PCR test after 14 days, the person is likely to test positive for COVID, but he does not have the active infection and he cannot spread it. So there is no reason to unnecessarily keep isolating such people who have COVID or who are continuing to test positive, because it is a mentally difficult disease, a difficult condition to live with. After 14 days, they are clear. Let them interact, let them just get back and, meet their family and whoever else. So you don't need a test at all. In the hospital, we don't test patients for negative COVID after even 14 days. They are sent home without a test.
So we have one more question, that some people haven't taken vaccines yet. So Pfizer and Sputnik V are coming to India. So do you suggest that they should wait for those vaccines?
Wait instead of what? Means should they wait for the vaccine?
Should they wait for the Sputnik and the other vaccines to come, Pfizer to come to India, or they should just take the vaccines what are available right now?
Take what you get at the earliest. There is no point waiting for a vaccine that you believe is better or has, I don't know, maybe slightly better efficacy, or is an more latest technology like mRNA. All vaccines are good in terms of preventing severe COVID. That is the objective of a vaccine. So take any vaccine that you can as soon as you can.
So can COVID spread through use of public toilets?
Yes.
Or, toilet plates?
The toilets is a big spreader, right? Because it's basically a very, very bodily fluids, all kinds of droplets. It's a very, very infectious place. Definitely the highest, public common toilets is a big spreader of COVID. More than just sitting with a patient, with a person with COVID, definitely. So yeah.
So the people who have already got COVID once, can they have a second COVID bout again? Yes, I think they do.
Yes, they can. We know patients who've come back second time with COVID. I know somebody who's had COVID 3 times in a span of 3 months apart. So we're seeing all kinds of strange possibilities as we are, living with the disease.
So we have one more question, that can you mix vaccines? So say a Covishield and the other one would be a Pfizer.
You can't do that unless the regime changes to do so. So as of now, you have to take the same vaccine. You have to complete the vaccine dose, the first and the second dose, or the third dose, or whatever is the regime for a specific vaccine has to be done with that vaccine only. You cannot mix them up.
So can the Covishield, after 2 doses of Covishield, would it protect you against the new mutant?
We believe so. We have you can still get COVID. Let's be clear that people with 2 doses of vaccine can still get COVID. What is very important to know is that you are more, in all probability, will be protected from severe COVID. So having mild COVID, having a mild viral infection is okay. You will get through it. You won't need hospitalization. When I say severe COVID, I mean most patients who get COVID after 2 jabs will recover at home. They do not need to get hospitalized.
So is there any way by which people who do not have an Aadhaar card, how can they get vaccinated?
There are 3 statutory IDs that I believe are applicable for the vaccine: Aadhaar, PAN card, and I think any other driver's license. So you can put any of those as your statutory IDs, and you're eligible for the vaccine.
So people who have taken the first dose but have not taken the second dose weeks, is it a washout?
Sorry, come again?
People who have taken the first dose but have not taken the second dose after 10 weeks, is the first dose a washout?
No, it's not. No, it's not. It is still. So, like the new guidelines have just come out, which is now recommending Covishield 12 to 16 weeks. So you will still get the effectiveness of the vaccine. It is not like you have to repeat the first dose again. Absolutely not.
So for how long does one have to wait to take the vaccine after getting COVID once?
I think it's about 4 weeks, but it's good to just check with your clinician.
Are we moving
I just
towards?
want to put a disclaimer here. I'm not a doctor. So everything that I have kind of talked about here is based on my obviously close understanding of COVID in the hospital, with my doctors, etc. So my advice here is not a doctor's advice. So you know, just to kind of put that out there.
So one more interesting question, that Covishield is banned in Europe. Young adults should take which one?
So, you know, the little bit of reportings of, you know, whatever blood clots and those kind of things with the Astra vaccine, Covishield, the incidences are very, what should I say, sparse and very insignificant. So, you know, yes, it is safe to take it for young adults, old adults. My 97, 98-year-old grandmother has taken both doses of Covishield. She was completely asymptomatic, no vaccine symptoms after either dose. So absolutely safe to take the vaccine and no issues.
Zavia, Samina is asking you a question, that what has been the most challenging moment for you?
So I think it's been for us at the hospital. I think you know, when we see cases coming in and we're not able to really you know, at least a couple of weeks back or a week or 10 days ago, when we had the deluge of COVID and we were seeing 10,000 odd cases in the city, even, you know, 7,000-8,000 cases. Hospitals just don't have enough capacity in Bombay to handle this volume. You know, the last peak that we saw last year, we were just at the brink of just about able to manage these numbers, the numbers that were there. So anything that has crossed over has been, you know, we've had to refuse patients. We've had patients come into our emergency and, you know, gasping. They've been young patients. This time we have seen that COVID has affected a younger population, not because the virus is attacking younger people, but I think younger people are getting it because a little bit of, socializing, lifestyle, whatever you say. And so, we've not been able to say 40-year-olds, 30-year-olds. We've often had to make the choice of, do we admit a 40-year-old or an 80-year-old? And those are very difficult ethical decisions and calls that are, we're faced with every day. So I think those have been the most challenging, difficult things for us to deal with at a very, you want to save every life, but you can't. So.
Zavia, thank you. This has been a superb session. So many myths busted and so much of information that you've given us today. Thank you very much for this.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yes. So can I request Vicky to give the formal vote of thanks, please?
Absolutely. Wow, that was too good. This was so informative. I am Vicky Punjabi, and I'm the president of Rotary Club of Bombay Midtown. And thank you, President Smita, for offering me the privilege of saying the vote of thanks. And on this auspicious day, I would like to wish Zabia a very Eid Mubarak to you. And also to all the Rotary members, a very Eid Mubarak, and especially to the ones who are celebrating. And let me now proceed by, sharing some experience of mine. So when my club has been in existence since 52 years or so, and various generations of members are still there. And when I put up in the club that we have Zabia Khurakiwala speaking to us, so there was a flurry in the club chat that, oh, whose daughter is she? Is she Habil's daughter? Is it Juza's daughter? And then is she the managing director of Wockhardt? And she's so young. So basically, it looks like I was the only one who not knowing her, or should I say she not knowing me. And hopefully after this vote of thanks, she will know me a little better. And thank you, Zabia. And if I put something, my memory about Wockhardt in perspective, I had visited Wockhardt Hospital, and where my dad had a big spinal surgery about 10 years back. And the hospital had just opened up, or must be 8 years back, I don't remember. And it was brand new, and there were very few people there. There were doctors there, yes, but very few people coming. And I remember when I went to the hospital with my dad, I had to go a number of times. And in the OPD section, whilst waiting for the surgeon to see us, the hospital administration came and offered us tea or coffee, and that's something I have not seen in any hospital administration offering the patients in the OPD a choice of tea or coffee, So we were really blown away with that, and I think totally pleasantly surprised. And probably, it is the compassion that reflects in the family, that is reflecting in the hospital processes and in the hospital staff. So that is Wockhardt's experience to me. And my dad obviously recovered from the surgery, and he's doing reasonably well now. So thank you for guiding us and also, reminding us of Zabia about the mask wearing and techniques and steam inhalation. And that was also very refreshing to us, since we have forgotten all these things. Also, thanks for throwing the light on CRP, D-dimer, O2 saturation, and also on the horrible black fungus, which we are all scared of. And also breaking the myths on surface transmission, which of COVID virus. And thank you for all that. And lastly, I want to also thank everybody in the audience for taking time out to be here and to listen to Zabia speak. So have a great weekend, everybody.
Thank you, Vicky. That was a really nice vote of thanks.
Thanks. And Smita, you handled the questionnaire so well. I was really, it was flowing faster than you could say. And you could not, you had to select and choose. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Zabia, we have a little proposal for you. Can you become an honorary member of the Rotary Club of Bombay Bayview?
Oh,
It would be our privilege.
thank you for that. Thank you. That's really, I mean, I'm a bit surprised, but I will, I mean, it's a great honor. Thank you very much. I will come back to you with it. I will speak to you offline.
Thank you very much. Tejal, can you please have the secretarial announcements?
Hi, everybody. We had 144 logins today. The next meeting is on the 21st of May. Speaker is Dr. Murad Lala. His topic is his journey to the Mount Everest. Thank you.
Thank you, Tejal. The meeting is now adjourned. Bye-bye, everybody. Have a nice evening and a great weekend ahead.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.